Welcome to this YSL tutorial. In this video we're going to teach you one of the most fundamental things you need to understand to use Excel VBA, and that's how to select and refer to cells. We'll start the video with looking at how you refer to cells based on their absolute position on the worksheet. So that's using the word range or the word cells, and using cell references or row and column numbers. We'll also show you how you can refer to a cell that has been selected using the Activecell keyword, and then move on to looking at selecting multiple cells, how you refer to a selection of multiple cells, and also how you could use a range name to refer to a range of cells you might have previously defined. Once we've covered absolute positions, we're going to talk about how to select cells relatively. And there's loads of useful things you can do there, such as finding the end of a list, moving up, down, left or right on the worksheet a specified number of rows or columns, and also things like selecting from the top to the bottom of a list, and selecting entire regions and entire columns. So we've got quite a lot to get through, we best get started. You won't get very far with Excel VBA unless you understand how to select or refer to cells, and this video is going to teach you several different ways to do that. All of our examples are based on this list of the top 10 highest grossing films of 2012, and we're going to be writing subroutines which will add new films to the list. So to start with, we need to get into the VB editor, and the quickest, easiest way to do that is to hold down the Alt key on your keyboard and press F11. When you get into the VB editor, we'll need to insert a new module, and we can do that by right-clicking in the Project Explorer, choosing Insert and choosing Module. And then finally we'll just quickly rename the module, and I'm going to call mine Mod Selecting Cells. So there we're ready to go. We'll start with a quick look at how you can select single individual cells based on their absolute position on the worksheet. So let's have a quick subroutine in which we can write the code that will do that. Select single cells by position. Enter a couple of times and tab once. So what I need to start doing now is selecting single individual cells. If I quickly switch back into Excel itself, Alt and F11 on your keyboard, the cells I need to select are A13, B13 and then C13, and I need to fill in the cells with the relevant values. So to do that, I'm going to show you first of all the most common way to select an individual cell, and that's using a keyword called range. Range is a type of object in Excel VBA, and it's how Excel VBA describes any cell or block of cells is referred to as a range object. And you can use this keyword to refer to a single individual cell by typing in a set of round brackets or parentheses, and then double quotes, and then the cell reference of the cell that you want to refer to. Close the double quotes and close the round brackets, and then what I would like to do to this object is I'd like to select it. If I type in a full stop, that should display the IntelliSense list. The method that I'm looking for in this list is called select. If I type in the letter S, select is the first item that I find, so all I need to do now is press enter, and that's how you select a single cell based on a cell reference. Now I need to change the value of the cell that I've just selected, and when we're talking about individual cells, there is a quick and easy way to refer to the individual cell that is currently selected on screen. And the keyword that will do that for you is called Activecell. Now just a quick reminder, if you don't want to have to type in long keywords, you can always hold down the Control key on your keyboard and press the space bar to attempt to force the IntelliSense list to appear. And that will allow you to pick out certain long words, and it means you don't have to type them in. So the word I want is called Activecell, and what I'd like to do to the Activecell is change its value. So type in a full stop after the word Activecell and look for the value property. And there it is, it's the second one after the letter V. So what I'd like to do is change the value to be equal to the number 11, which is the next number that I want to add in column A. So there we go, two lines that will first of all select a single cell and then change the value of the cell that has just been selected. The next technique we'll look at for selecting a single cell allows you to refer to a row number and a column number rather than a cell reference. So what we'll do, although I could write range B13.select, what I'm going to do instead is use the cells keyword. Cells, if you open a set of parentheses after it, allows you to specify a row number and the column number for a cell that you want to refer to. So the row number here will be row number 13. Follow that with a comma. The column number will be column number 2, which is column B. close the parentheses, and then what I'd like to do is select that cell. If I type in a full stop, you can see hopefully one disadvantage of using cells compared to range is that it doesn't display the IntelliSense, and I can't press Control and Space to force the IntelliSense list to appear either. All you have to be aware of really is that when you use the cells keyword, it returns a reference to a range object. So the things that you can do to that range object are exactly the same as what you can do had you used the range keyword instead. So I can say cells 13,2 dot select. Hit enter, and then what I'd like to do is change the value of the cell that has just been selected. So again, if I press Control and Space at the start of the next line, look for the word Activecell, dot value equals, and then apparently the 11th highest grossing film of the year 2012 was a film called The Lorax. If I can spell that properly. It doesn't really matter, it's an odd made-up word anyway. And any literal text that you want to use in a cell, you must then close in a set of double quotes. So unlike numbers, which can be just written directly into your code, you must then close literal text in double quotes. So there we go. Those are two values for our film filled in. So there's one final way I wanted to show you for selecting a single cell, and it's a fairly unusual technique. You're unlikely to see this used frequently in the real world. But there's a shortcut way to refer to a cell based on its cell reference without having to use the keyword range or the keyword cells. You can actually, in a set of square brackets, type in the cell reference of the cell that you want to refer to. Again, if you type in a full stop after you've done this, you don't see any IntelliSense. But this is just a quick shorthand way to refer to a range object. And you can again use exactly the same list of properties and methods had you actually used the word range. So C13.select, then hit enter, and I want to change the value of the newly active cell, so Control and Space to bring up the IntelliSense list, look for Activecell, type in a full stop, look for the value property, and I want to make this equal to a release date. Now according to Wikipedia, the Lorax was released on the 2nd of March 2012. When you want to enter dates in VBA, you need to enclose dates in a set of hash marks. And UK users will need to be very, very careful about typing in their dates in the UK date format. If I typed in 2/3/2012, although to a person from the UK that looks like the 2nd of March 2012, that's actually February 3rd 2012. So yes, unfortunately, dates are in US format in VBA, regardless of what the language settings of your computer are. So there are a couple of different ways around this. You could just, I suppose, remember that it's month first and day second. Or, if you prefer, you can type in your dates like so. You can type in your dates as 2, followed by a short 3-letter code for the month, followed by the year. When you hit enter at the end of the line, you will see that this date format changes, but what you can guarantee is that the month goes into the correct position and the day goes into the correct position. So essentially you don't have to worry about which bit is where. So there we go, 3 different ways to refer to, select, and change the values of cells. So all that remains for this simple routine is to execute the code to make sure the values go in the right place. And I think it's probably worthwhile stepping through this procedure to make sure that we can see each line happening as we expect it to. So I'm going to resize my screen slightly so that I can see Excel in the background. There we go, so I can see the cells that I'm going to be referring to. And then I click anywhere inside the subroutine I want to execute, and then press the F8 key once. So each subsequent time I now press the F8 key, it will execute the line that is currently highlighted. So press F8 to reach range A13.select. So when I execute this line, we ought to be able to see in the background that cell becomes selected. So F8, and there it is. So the value then becomes 11 for the active cell. And then we move on to the cells 13,2, and that will select cell B13, and so on. And then C13, a slightly unusual method, which also works, and then that changes the value to the 2nd of March. Notice, again, UK users, that when you transfer the value into a cell in the worksheet, which is a date, then that takes on board the date formatting of your computer. So the front end of Excel will use the regional settings of your computer, whereas it's just the VBA code itself which doesn't. So this is, I promise, this is the 2nd of March 2012, not February 3rd. So when I press F8 one final time just to end the subroutine, there we go, there's selecting single cells based on absolute position. One thing that's very important to realise about selecting or referring to range objects is that it's implied that you want to do that on whichever worksheet is active when you execute the code. So I can demonstrate what I mean by that by manually selecting a different worksheet in my workbook and then returning to the VB editor and execute this subroutine again. I'm going to do this by using the Run button or pressing F5 on my keyboard this time, so that should just happen as quickly as possible. And hopefully you can see that this has happened in whichever worksheet I had active, so it was in sheet 2 this time. That could mean that when you do this sort of thing in the real world, you'll want to write a line of code which first of all selects the relevant worksheet. So if I add a line to the top of my subroutine, which will do that for us, I'm going to refer to Worksheets, Sheet 1, and I'm going to say .activate. Now there are many different ways to select or activate worksheets. This is just one simple technique that you'll find commonly used. We'll have another video which explains the various different ways of referring to and selecting worksheets later on. But this will make sure that when I execute my code, whichever worksheet I was on to begin with, I change from that one into Worksheet 1 and then change the values of the appropriate cells. So if I use F8 to step through this subroutine now, you can hopefully see at the bottom I'm still on sheet 2. If I use F8 to step through this routine, when I reach this one, worksheet sheet 1 activate, I first of all move to sheet 1 and then subsequently select and change the values of all of those cells again. You can even extend this technique of referring to a specific worksheet first by referring to a specific workbook as well. If I pop back into Excel briefly and create a quick new workbook, I can do that by holding down the Control key and pressing N. So I have a new workbook which is called Book 2, and as I haven't saved it yet, it doesn't have a file name extension. If I go back to the VB editor now, in my Project Explorer, I should see a new project listed for that new workbook. So if I extend my screen down again, you can see VBA Project Book 2. So what I could do in my Select Single Cells by Position subroutine is before I refer to a specific worksheet, I could also refer to a specific workbook. And I can do that by saying Workbooks, open parentheses and double quotes, Book 2, which is its name, close the double quotes, close the parentheses, and then say .activate. So it's very similar to how you activate a worksheet. One thing to bear in mind is if you have saved the workbook, you'll need to provide the file name extension here as well. So for example, if I was referring to my top movies 2012, I'd have to extend .xlsm to the name. But what I can do now is if I quickly switch back into Excel, and I'm going to make sure I'm in the top movies workbook first of all, I'm going to make sure I'm on sheet 1. If I pop back into the VB editor again with Alt and F11, and if I step through the first few lines of this subroutine using the F8 key, I'll find that the very first thing that happens, in fact you'll see this a bit more clearly if you can see the title bar at the top of the Excel window. I'm in Top Movies 2012. When I hit F8 here, it now moves into Book 2 first, and then it makes sure it's on a specific worksheet, and then so on and so on and so on. It will fill in the values in the relevant cells. So there you go, there's how you can get from any workbook into any other open workbook, any worksheet in that workbook, and then any single cell on that worksheet. So far we've approached the problem of changing cell values in the same way you would have to do it in the real world. If you were doing it manually, we've selected a cell and then changed the value of the cell we've just selected. But in VBA, it's possible to change the value of a cell without having to select it first. So we're going to demonstrate that with a quick new subroutine, which adds a new film to the next row, which will be row number 14. So sub, change cell values without selecting them. I should have picked shorter subroutine names, shouldn't I? Change cell values without selecting. I'll get that right in a moment. There we go. So To begin with, you need to pick one of the methods you like to use to refer to your cells. You can either use range, cells, or the shorthand way. I'm going to revert to using range, mainly because I get the IntelliSense available with the range keyword. Again, I can use my IntelliSense at the start of the line. I can press Control and Space and look for the word range in the list, and then open a set of round brackets and double quotes, and this time the first cell I want to refer to is A14. Close the double quotes, close the parentheses, and then hit the full stop. So previously I applied the select method to the range object I've referred to. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to just directly refer to the value property. So if I type in the letter V, you'll see that I can directly refer to the value property of a range, whether or not it's selected. So range A14.value equals, and then the next number in the list will be the number 12, and then hit enter. And I can carry on in that same vein. I can say range B14, 14.value, try again, equals, and then the next film in the list, according to Wikipedia, was Wreck-It Ralph. That was the 12th highest grossing film of 2012. I've not seen it, I don't know if it's any good or not. And then finally, I can say range C14.value equals, and the release date for Wreck-It Ralph was the 2nd of November. So I'm going to type that in as 2nov 2012, close the hash marks, and when I hit enter at the end of the line, I'll know that the number for the month and the number for the day go into the correct place. So if I resize the VB editor window so we can see Excel in the background, and just scroll down so that I can see the subroutine I've just written, we can step through this one and show you that you can clearly see that I haven't got any of these cells selected. But if I use F8 to step through this routine, you'll see as if by magic almost, the values appear in the cells without having to have them selected. This is a much more efficient technique than selecting a cell and then changing its value. You can indirectly change the value of a cell using a technique like this. Again, hopefully you'll notice it's implied that the cells you want to change are on the currently active worksheet when you execute the code. But you can extend lines like this to refer to cells on a different worksheet entirely. So at the start of each of these lines, if I referred to, let's see, worksheets sheet 2 dot range A14, etc., and if I copy and paste that part to the beginning of each of these lines, then what this will do is change the value of a specific cell on a specific worksheet without having to have either of those two things selected. So if I step through this routine, just to prove that I'm running it, and then what I would have to do then is manually go away and check sheet 2 to ensure that those values are there, and indeed there they are. And guess what? Of course you can extend this yet even further by referring to a specific workbook first. So if I create another brand new workbook while I'm here, that's going to be book 3 this time. Back to the VB editor, and at the start of each of these lines I could refer to workbooks, book 3, dot worksheets, sheet 2, and then the specific range object that I want to refer to there. Again, I'll copy this to the beginning of each of the other lines. Back in Excel, I'll just quickly make sure that I've gone back to my original Top Movies 2012 workbook. Then in the VB editor, make sure we can see the screen at the top. You won't see this change. We're not going to move away from the Top Movies workbook now. But when I step through this routine, each of those 3 lines have been executed on a completely different workbook. If I switch into that book 3 now and head on to sheet 2, I'll see that those specific cells have been filled in from a completely different workbook. So you can hopefully see that this sort of technique can make your code much more efficient. You don't have to perform all these extra selections or activations of workbooks and worksheets and cells. You can indirectly modify the values of cells using a line of code such as this one. Now that we've seen how to select single cells, let's move on and look at how you can select multiple cells at the same time. So for example, we might want to format the titles at the top of our table. We'll write a simple routine that will select cells A1 to C1 and maybe change their background colour. So back to the VB editor first, and we'll need another new subroutine. I'm going to call it sub select multiple cells. And I'm going to give myself a bit more space below this one just to push up the code so you can see it a little bit more clearly. There we go. Just as with single cells, there are several ways to select multiple cells. Let's start by using range. So range, open brackets and double quotes. The first cell reference I wanted to refer to is A1, and the end of the block of cells I want to refer to is C1. So if you separate those with a colon, like so, close the quotes and brackets, dot select, that's how you refer to multiple cells in a fairly straightforward way. If I wanted to do something to the cells that I had just selected, I can't use the word Activecell to do so. Activecell only ever refers to one cell. So when you have multiple cells selected and you want to refer to them, you use the word selection instead. So selection dot, and unfortunately you're not provided with any IntelliSense with the selection keyword. So what I'm going to do is choose to modify the interior property, and I'm going to modify the colour of the interior. Again, UK users, watch out for the American spelling of colour. There's no U in colour in VBA. And let's see, I'm going to change it to a background colour. I'll display my IntelliSense list with Control and Space and look for one of my RGB colours. So some kind of dark blue, I think. Sounds good? There we go. So there's one simple way to select multiple cells. Now, just as with single cells, it's not necessary to select multiple cells before you attempt to change one of their properties. So let's imagine I wanted to change the font colour of the same block of cells. I'll use the range technique again. So range A1 to C1 with a colon separating them. And rather than selecting the cells, I can just refer directly to the property that I want to modify. So this time it's going to be the font property. And hopefully, clearly the advantage of this is that you don't lose the IntelliSense as you do when you use the word selection. So font colour equals, and let's go with RGB white, I think. RGB white, there we go. I can also use my shorthand way to refer to multiple cells. So if you remember from the previous examples, we were looking at putting a cell reference inside a set of square brackets. So if I want again to refer to the same block of cells, A1 to C1, I can simply do this. A1 to C1 in a set of square brackets, and let's see, let's change the font size this time. So again, unfortunately, we don't use the IntelliSense. We haven't got access to the IntelliSense list, so you have to know what properties you can change. So I'm going to make the font size equal to, let's say, 14. And there we go. I think that's probably enough formatting for the first row, so let's move on to row number 2, which if I just quickly switch back into Excel, contains the column headings. So let's look at a couple of other ways to refer to that block of cells. Back into the VB editor, I'm going to show you a slightly different syntax of the range technique. So if I go for the word range again, and open some brackets, and to begin with, I'm going to refer to cell A2 in its own set of double quotes. I don't know if you can make out the tooltip that's appearing on screen here. The range property technically has 2 separate arguments, which allow you to refer to effectively the top left-hand corner and the bottom right-hand corner of the range you want to select or refer to. So after I've referred to cell A2, I can type in a comma, and then in its own set of double quotes again, I can type in C2. So that effectively refers to the corners of the block of cells that I want to select. I'm not actually going to select them. All I'm going to do is change the interior colour again, and I'm going to go for, let's see, a light blue this time, I think. Do we have light blue? There it is. Perfect. So the syntax is slightly more awkward. There are a few more characters to type in compared to the original technique we looked at with using range. But we are going to see this one used a lot more frequently later on. It becomes much more useful when we start looking at relative selection methods. So bear this one in mind. We're going to use this one again several more times in this video. This syntax would also be the only way we could incorporate cells to refer to multiple cells. Unfortunately, you can't use cells by itself to refer to a block of cells on multiple range objects. If we wanted to use the cells technique, what we would have to do is enclose it within this syntax of the range property. So what we would have to do is say range, open parentheses, and then cells, open parentheses again. We just move the mouse cursor. The first cell I want to refer to is cell A2. So that's row 2, column 1. Close one set of parentheses, then another comma, and cells, in this case the row number would be 2 again, and the column would be 3. So that's C2. close a parentheses for cells, close another set for range, and then I can say dot font dot color perhaps equals, oh, I don't know, let's go for RGB dark blue. It's very incredibly awkward to do. I think it's fairly unusual that you would want to use cells to refer to multiple range objects, so you'd almost exclusively use range when you want to refer to multiple cells. So all we should need to do now is give this quick routine a test to make sure that it does the job that it's meant to do. So let me drag the screen down so we can see the cells we're going to be affecting, and then we'll step through this one just so we can see that all the things we expect to happen actually are happening. So range A1 to C1 select. So press F8, and there we go, we see those cells selected, and then that's going to change the interior colour of the selected cells, and that works. The next line should work whether or not we had those cells selected in the first place. So let me just quickly click on a different cell altogether, switch back to the VB editor and press F8 again, and we'll see the font changes to white regardless of whether it was selected or not. And F8 again, just to prove that the other method works, that increases our font size. And then range A2 to C2, we're going to modify the interior colour of those. And then finally we're going to change the font colour of those cells to dark blue. F8 one more time on end sub to make sure that we finish running our subroutine. And those are all the techniques, or most of the basic techniques at least, for selecting multiple cells. If you've been using Excel for a while, you might have encountered a feature called range names. A range name is simply a label that refers to a single cell or a block of cells. So it's like a plain English word that refers to cells. So we can create range names in several different ways. I don't want to spend too long doing this because I want to focus more on how you would do this in VBA. But let's, for instance, create a range name which refers to our list of column headings. Once you've selected some cells, you can click into this area of the screen, the name box. And if you click into this, you can type in a new name for that block of cells. Make sure you don't use spaces when you type in the name you want to use, and make sure you press enter when you finish typing. So what that means is if I click away from that block of cells, the name box itself now contains a unique word, column headings, and if I select it, it will take me to that range of cells. Another quick way to select or create range names is to select a block of cells, including some column headings, which you want to use as labels. So what I'd like to do is create 3 range names, one called ID, one called title, and one called release date. So once I've selected all of those cells, I can head to the Formulas tab in the ribbon and look for the option called Create from Selection. This is in the Defined Names group. If you let the mouse cursor link, you'll see there's also a keyboard shortcut for this, Control and Shift and F3. But whichever of the two options you choose, either the keyboard shortcut or simply clicking the tool, you'll be presented with this little dialog box. Now, make sure you only have one of these checkboxes checked for this if you're doing this particular example. I don't want to use names in the right-hand column. What I want to do is use the labels in the top row of my selected cells to create 3 range names. So when I click OK, all I need to do now is look back in the name box, and I should find that I now have 3 new range names. Notice that any spaces that were in the column headings have been replaced with an underscore character. If I select each one of these, it shows me which cells those range names refer to. Should you ever need to delete a range name, and again this is the last thing I'll mention I think on range names in Excel itself, should you want to delete a range name, you can use the Name Manager. So you click on the Name Manager tool, select the range name that you want to remove, and then simply click the Delete button. I'm not going to delete mine now because what I want to do is show you how you can refer to these range names in VBA. So to refer to these range names in VBA, let's head back to the VB editor, and I think we'll have a new subroutine for this, sub refer to range names. And we're going to use the range technique once again to begin with. So let's refer to our range of film IDs. So we have a range name called ID. All we need to do is replace, in the range technique, we replace the cell reference with the range name itself. So range ID dot select, or in fact let's just change some sort of font property. Let's say font dot italic equals true. So that will refer to the ID range. You can also use the shorthand technique to refer to a range name. So if I open a set of square brackets and the next column was title, close the square brackets, and then I can modify a property of those cells. So let's say font color equals RGB dark blue perhaps. And there we go. So two techniques for referring to range names. So let's give the subroutine a quick test to check that it works. So if I just resize the screen so we can see the columns will modify, and I'll use F8 to step through the routine. So we should see the ID numbers change to italic, and there they go. And then we should see that the font of the titles changes to dark blue, and there that goes. F8 one more time to end the subroutine, and that's how you use VBA to refer to range names. For all of the techniques we've used so far for referring to cells, we've needed to know exactly which cell on the spreadsheet to refer to, so we either need to know its cell reference, or its range name, or its row and column numbers. What we're going to do now is show you how you can refer to cells relatively, based on their position relative to other cells. So we'll write a routine which will add in a new film to whichever row is the next blank one in our list. The methods we'll use will work basically like this. We'll start by selecting cell A1, or referring to cell A1, as we know that's a known fixed starting point. From there, we'll simulate getting down to the end of the list in a downwards direction. You can do this by holding down the Control key on your keyboard and pressing the down arrow key. That will jump down to the last populated cell in a list, assuming there are no blanks anywhere in that column. Once we've done that, we'll need to move one cell further down from there, and then we can populate that cell with the next number in the sequence, and then we can populate the cell one column to the right with the name of the film, and the cell two columns to the right with the release date of that film. So what we need to do is work out how to make that work in VBA terms. So let's start by going back to the VB editor, and I think we'll have a new module for this as well. So I'm going to right click in the Project Explorer, choose Insert, Module, and I'm going to rename it using the Properties window. I'm going to call it Mod Relative Select. And a new subroutine in here, which we'll call Add Film to End of List. And now we're ready to go. Now I want to make sure that we're on the correct worksheet when we run this subroutine, so the first line of code is actually going to select or activate sheet 1 to make sure we're in the correct place. So worksheet sheet 1.activate. Then we know our starting point is range A1, so we might as well select that one as well, and we know how to do that already. So I'm going to use my range technique, so range A1.select. Now from here, what we need to do is move down first of all to the end of the list in a downwards direction. So from the cell that I've just referred to, or selected, so I can now refer to it as Activecell, I want to use the property called end. Now end allows you to move in one of 4 different directions, and to specify the direction you want to move, you need to open a set of parentheses and then pick an item from the list. They're all fairly clearly labelled, so it's unfortunate that the one that we want is hidden beneath the tooltip, but if I use the cursor keys to start scrolling through the list, I'll find the one that I want appears Excel down. So Excel down, close the parentheses, and finally I need to do something to the cell that I've just referred to. So I either need to modify one of its properties, or what I'm going to do is select it. So at this point I'd like to quickly demonstrate what that does. So if I just resize the screen a little bit so we can see what's going to happen, I'm going to use F8 to step through. So worksheet sheet 1 activate, we won't see anything happen here because we're already on that worksheet. Range A1.select, we already know what that will do. This is the important line here. What we're going to see happen is that the next cell that will be selected is whichever the last cell in column A is, so the last populated cell in that continuous column of values. So the next step is to get from that last populated cell to the cell that is one below it. So to do that, let me just resize my screen again. To do that, from my new active cell, I'm going to say Activecell dot offset. So another property which allows you to refer relatively to a cell. Now the offset property has 2 parameters. It's the number of rows that you want to move up or down, followed by the number of columns that you want to move left or right. So to move downwards, my row offset is 1. Positive numbers move you down the worksheet. Negative numbers will move you back up. Follow that with a comma, and then the number of columns that I want to move. I don't actually want to move any columns left or right, so I'm going to provide a 0 for this parameter. Close the parentheses, and once again, just like with the end property, I need to say what I want to do to the cell I have just referred to. So dot select once more. And again, finally what I'm going to do is quickly demonstrate what that does. If I step through this one reasonably quickly, so select the worksheet in cell A1, then end Excel down, takes me to the end of the list, offset 1, moves me down one further cell. Now I've written these instructions out separately to make it easy and clear to see what each one does. But were I doing this in the real world, I'd be tempted to combine these 3 instructions in one go. So referring to range A1, then the cell at the end of the list, and then one cell further down, we can actually do that in one single line. So let's start by referring to range A1. Then rather than selecting that cell, I want to refer to its end property, and I want to specify the Excel down direction for the end property. Following that, I don't want to select the cell at the bottom of the list, I want to then refer to the range that is one cell further down from the range referred to by the end property. So I can tag on an offset to the end of this, open a set of parentheses, and I want to refer to the cell as 1 row down and 0 columns across. And finally at that point, I think that I do want to select that cell, so I'll tag a dot select on to the end of the instruction. So essentially that line combines the 3 things we're doing in the previous 3 lines, but it does it in one single action, so there's only one single select method used here, which is way more efficient when you come to run code like this, and it's always the preferred approach, I think, that you should be aiming for. So I've deleted the previous 3 lines. That line now will take us down to our next available blank cell at the end of the list, and although it's not going to be very impressive when I quickly execute it, because we'll just end up at the bottom of this at the list in one go. Just to prove that it does work, that will take us to where we need to be. Now that we know we can get to the correct cell, we need to start populating the new blank row with the new values. So let's start by adding in the new ID number. So whichever cell I've just selected, I'm going to refer to as Activecell, and I want to change the value of that cell to be equal to something. Now I'm not necessarily going to know what the previous ID number is. So what I'm going to do first is read the value of the cell that is one above the active cell. So Activecell.offset -1, 0 dot value. All I need to do then is add 1 to that value, and I'll have added in the new ID number. Simple as that. Now to fill in the name and the release date of the next film, I need to refer to the cells that are 1 column across and 2 columns across, respectively. So again, the next line I'm going to start with the word Activecell, and I'm going to use the offset property again. I want to go 0 rows up or down this time, but I want to refer to the cell that is 1 column to the right, so that's a positive number. You use negative numbers to move left. If I close the parentheses, I don't want to select that cell. I'm going to stay exactly where I am in column A. What I'm going to do is change the value of that cell to be equal to the next film in the list. And apparently, according to my information, that was the film Lincoln, which again, I've not seen that one either. So that will change the value of that cell to be that piece of text. And while we're here, I'm actually going to quickly cheat, copy and paste this part, because I want to refer to the cell now that is 2 columns to the right. So remember, I'm still in column A, so to refer to column C I need to refer to the cell that is 2 columns to the right, and the date, or the release date of Lincoln was 9/2012. So there we go. That's how you refer to cells based on relative positions. So you use end to jump to the top, bottom, left or right of a continuous block, and you use offset to refer to cells that are a specific number of rows or columns away from the one you have selected. So all that we have to do now is run the subroutine to make sure that it works. So let's resize the screen again so we can see clearly what's going to happen in the background, and use F8 to step through the routine. We'll start with selecting the next blank cell, which we knew that one worked already, and then the next number should be 13, which is one more than 12, and Lincoln should go into column B, and that release date should go into column C, just like so. F8 one more time to make sure the subroutine is ended. So it would be nice, I guess, if the film name and film release date were variable as well, rather than adding in the same film every single time. We might want to prompt the user for the film name and release date, but we're going to save how to do that for another video. One small problem with the formatting of our new film is that it doesn't match the formatting of the films above it in the list. So we could fairly easily actually just add on the code that would change the font to italic and the font colour of the title to blue. But what I'd like to do is show you how you can write code which applies formatting, or at least refers to cells, in a continuous list regardless of how long that list is. So it's going to simulate essentially the keyboard shortcut whereby if you have, for instance, cell A3 selected, you could hold down Control and Shift on your keyboard and tap the down arrow key, and that would extend your selection all the way down to the end of the list, regardless of how long it is. So that's what we're going to do, but in VBA. So to do that, we'll head back to the VB editor, and we'll start a new subroutine, which we'll call select, let's call it variable column, or col for short. So when we're using this technique, we're going to use one of the syntaxes of the range technique. So we're going to start by referring to range A3. We know that that's the first cell which contains an ID number. What I want to do then is refer to the cell that is at the end of that list. Now if I knew its exact cell reference, I could simply say whatever it was, A13 or so. But I don't know its cell reference because that list could be any height at all. So rather than using the cell reference for the cell2 parameter, what I'm going to do instead is say range, open parentheses, and then essentially what we did here, from range A1 dot end Excel down. Now we saw previously that this referred to the cell at the end of the continuous list. So if I replicate that here with A1 dot end Excel down, parentheses rather than a number 9, that would help. That entire set of code there refers to the cell that is at the end of the list, regardless of which one it is. So all I need to do now is close the extra set of parentheses for the range property, and then say dot select if I wanted to select it. So just to prove that this does actually work, if I just resize the screen and make sure that I don't have that block of cells selected first, and then quickly use the F8 key to step through this routine. Whenever that line is executed, it looks for the top cell as A3 and the bottom cell as whichever cell is at the end of the list from cell A1. So when I F8 this line, that's the block of cells that I get selected. And it doesn't matter how many cells were in this list. I could add any number of extra items to the end manually, and if I go back to the VB editor and step through this code again, I'll find that that now selects the entire list again. So what we need to do next, I suppose, is if I get rid of these extra values that I typed in, what we need to do next is then apply formatting to that entire block of cells that would be selected. So we can do that with the selection keyword. So we can say selection dot font dot italic equals true. And of course, just as with all of our other examples, we don't necessarily have to select this block of cells before we can format it. Rather than dot select, we could simply say dot font dot italic equals true at the end of this line. Finally, if we execute this entire subroutine in one go, just use the F5 key or click the green triangle on the toolbar, we ought to find that entire block of cells gets selected and the font is changed to italic. Now I can use almost exactly the same technique to colour in the fonts of column B as well. So what I would want to do, just quickly switching back into Excel, is change everything from cell B3 down to the end of the list. Now the technique I used for column A was to go from cell A3 And then the second cell I referred to as A1.endExcelDown. So essentially what I did was from cell A1, it was like holding down the control key and pressing the down arrow key. Now that works because column A has a continuous list of values from cell A1 all the way down to the end of the list. But column B, however, the very first cell, if I select cell B1, there is no value in that cell. So you can see that the title is actually contained all in cell A1. Now if you have a blank cell, it's easier to demonstrate I think in with cell C1. If you have a blank cell and you hold down the control key and press the down arrow key, that simply takes you to the next populated cell. So what we're going to do for formatting the font of column B is we're going to go from cell B3, and then the second cell we'll refer to as B2.endExcelDown, and that will take us to the last populated cell in the list. There's one thing that's really worthwhile pointing out this technique with using the end property. When you have blank cells, what the end property does is not necessarily get you to where you want to be. So always check that before you start writing your code. But now that we know about that, let's go back to the VB editor, and I can pretty much just copy and paste most of this line already. So if I copy and paste that line, just resize the screen so I've got enough space to write the rest of it out. I can go from cell B3, I know that's the top cell in my list, and then from B2, endExcelDown, and rather than selecting those cells, I'm going to change the font color to be equal to RGB dark blue. Perfect. So if I execute that code now, what we ought to see, if I'll just run it through in one go, I should see that the entirety of column B now gets its font changed to dark blue. As one last example using this technique, what if I wanted to refer to all of my data cells to perhaps maybe change the background colour of them all? I can simulate that in Excel using keyboard shortcuts. So if I have cell A3 selected, I could hold down Control Shift and tap the down arrow key, and then Control Shift and tap the right arrow key, and that extends my selection from the top left hand corner to the bottom right hand corner. And I can do exactly that in VBA as well. So if I go back to the VB editor, and let's write this as a single line which will select that block of cells. So from range, A3, that's the top left hand corner, the bottom right hand corner I can get to by saying range, and then A1 dot end Excel down first of all, and I can simply then tag on another end property to the end of this, so dot end Excel to right. Close two sets of parentheses and then say dot select, and again I could just change one of the properties of that block of cells, but it's easier to demonstrate if I show you that it gets selected as well. And then I could maybe say selection dot interior dot color equals, and then I need to pick one of my RGB colors. Let's say, I don't know what Alice blue looks like. Let's find out what Alice blue looks like. So those two extra lines now, if I resize my screen a little bit, make sure that I don't have those cells selected in the first place, and then step through this routine. When I reach this line, what I should see is that my entire block of data cells gets selected, and that's exactly what happens. So if I use F8 now, we'll finally find out what Alice blue looks like. It looks like an even lighter shade of blue than light blue. So it is, I can just make out, at least on my screen, that is a very, very, very light shade of blue. So that's all the techniques I think for selecting columns or blocks of cells relatively. So we've just looked at how you can select a block of cells from a known starting point to the end of a list, regardless of how long it is or how wide it is. But what if you just wanted to select an entire continuous block of data from any cell within it? There's a keyboard shortcut in Excel that lets you do that. Select any cell within a continuous range and press Ctrl and A, and it selects the entire block. Unfortunately, there's a way to refer to that in VBA as well. So what we'll do is we'll write a quick routine that copies this entire region of data onto another worksheet. So let's start by going back to the VB editor, and I'll need a new subroutine for this. Let's call it sub copy film list. And let me just give myself a bit more space at the bottom of the screen to push this up. There we go, so you can read it a bit more clearly. And I'm going to start by selecting the appropriate worksheet, or going to Worksheets, Sheet 1 at least. So Worksheets, Sheet 1, .activate. Once I'm there, all I need to do at this point is refer to any cell that I know is in my block of film data. So usually you use the top left-hand corner, so that's usually where you start. So I know that the top left-hand corner of my block is range A1, followed by a full stop, and then the property that I'm looking for is called current region. Current region refers to the entire block of data in which cell A1 sits. And I could say .currentRegion.select, but what I want to do is .currentRegion.copy. Now, when I've copied something, there are several ways to put it into another position. I guess the obvious way to do it, I think, is as though you were doing this manually in Excel. What you would have to do is then go to a different worksheet, if you were trying to pop it into a different worksheet. So I go for sheet 2.activate. And then you would have to select a cell, and you would usually right-click and paste, or maybe press Ctrl and V. So I need to refer to another cell, so I'm going to say range A1, dot, and then the method that I'm looking for this time is called paste special. There's no single separate paste method for a range object in Excel VBA. It's always paste special. If you wanted to provide some extra information to the paste special method, there are some extra arguments. If you type in a space after the word paste special, you'll see that it has a list of extra parameters. So there's paste as paste type. By default, it will paste everything, but you can scroll through the list of constants there and see exactly which thing you want to paste. So I'm just going to paste all, which means that I don't need to specify any extra arguments. Just paste special by itself will do that. So, if I quickly look at what goes on there, if I just step through this routine, I should find that I use F8 to step through. It selects sheet 1, it copies the current region, you can see the dotted outline there to prove that's happened, goes to sheet 2, and then, I've forgotten that I'd added in these extra rows on sheet 2 earlier on. I'll just paste directly over the top of those. So, there we go. So, obviously, it doesn't change the column widths, unfortunately, so that's perhaps the next little problem that we'll solve. Probably the easiest way to solve the column widths problem is just to paste in the column widths immediately after you pasted all of the data. So where I've said range A1 dot paste special, below that I can also say range A1 dot paste special again, and this time specify that I want to paste in the column widths. It's unfortunate that you have to do this in two separate steps, but that is the case. So if I've modified my subroutine there again, maybe this time I'll go to sheet 3 just to go into a blank sheet rather than pasting over the top of what I've already got. And I'll step through the routine, so I can use F8 to step through. Sheet 1 will be activated. I'll copy that region of data, then go to sheet 3, paste in all of the data, and then paste over that with the column widths, and that will solve the problem and make sure our data looks nice and sensible. There is another method for copying data in Excel VBA as well. I'm going to demonstrate this. I'm going to add a new worksheet first of all, so I've got somewhere to paste my data. And then back to the VB editor, and I'm going to copy most of this subroutine actually. Let me just copy the entire subroutine to begin with. And then I'm going to delete a whole bunch of lines out of here. I'm going to delete everything except for going to worksheet 1 and copying the current region from range A1. I'll also need to modify my subroutine name. You can't have two subroutines with the same name in the same scope. So let's call this method 2. Nice inventive name. So once we've copied a cell, what I can also do is provide an extra argument or an extra parameter for the copy method. There's an optional argument or an optional parameter called destination. So this is simply a reference to a cell that you want to start pasting that data in or copying it to. So all I need to do is refer to, let's say I want to refer to a worksheet, the one that I've just added, which was called sheet 4. So worksheets, sheet 4. And then the cell that I want to copy that to is range A1 again. So this saves me having to go to another worksheet. I can just indirectly refer to range A1 on another worksheet and send my copied cells to that sheet. So if I once again just demonstrate this by stepping through, use F8 to select worksheet 1 or activate worksheet 1, and then copy that block of cells, sending the data to another worksheet. You almost can't see that it's happened in Excel itself. There's no indication that I've copied any data from sheet 1. But if I go to sheet 4, I should see, and indeed I do, that all my data is there. Of course, it's a little bit more awkward now to change the column headings. I can't just paste the column widths, sorry, not the column headings. I can't just paste the column widths over the cells that I've just pasted. So I need another method for changing the column widths. So let's add in the lines of code that will change the widths of columns B and C. Back to the VB editor, and I'm going to, well, first of all change the screen width so I have enough room to show you this. And in my film list method 2, copy film list method 2 subroutine, I'm going to add a couple of extra lines here. First of all, I'm going to cheat, copy the worksheets activate line, and make sure that we've gone onto worksheets sheet 4. Then I've got several choices here for how I could select or refer to columns B and C. There's a way to do this using the range property, so I can say range. If I want to refer to just column B, I could refer to B:B, and I could say .select or .copy or whatever. If I want to refer to range columns B and C, then I can simply update the reference to range B:C. I can also do it actually using another property called columns. So I refer to columns. Again, I can refer to B by itself, but I can refer to it in a slightly more short syntax by just referring to the letter B. So rather than B:B, it's just B. If I want to refer to more columns, then I can extend that syntax again and refer to B:C or whatever other column I wanted to refer to. What I can then do is either change the width of the cells, or I can apply a method that will change the width automatically. So if I wanted to change the width manually to an explicit value, I could refer to the width property. Notice that, again, unfortunately, the columns property doesn't provide you with the IntelliSense list, so you have to know what property to type in. So I could say .width, and I could say make it equal to an explicit value of 20. But that's not particularly useful because I don't know how wide my columns need to be. So rather than changing the width property directly, what I can do is apply a method called AutoFit. So if I were to demonstrate this now by, first of all, changing the width of my screen and using F8 to step through this, I'll go back to sheet 1 and then copy the data again, and then go back to sheet 4. But this extra line that we've added in here will change the widths of columns B and C to be exactly as wide as they need to be. So there's the changed columns. Now, I mentioned before that I could refer to columns B and C using the range property as well. There is one slight extended thing you would need to do in order to make the AutoFit method work. I'm going to comment out my columns line, and I'm going to replace that by referring to range B:C dot. Now you'll see that in the IntelliSense list there is an AutoFit method available, but unfortunately it won't work directly by referring to range B and C like this. To use AutoFit, I have to refer to an entire column, and that's what the columns property does. The columns returns a range of cells which forms an entire column of cells. So if I'm using the range property to do this, I need to first of all refer to the entire column property of that range, and then I can refer to the AutoFit method to achieve the same results. So if I very quickly pop back into Excel, and let's say I want to insert a new worksheet first of all. So I'll insert sheet 5, and back in the VB editor I'll update my references to sheet 4, so they go to sheet 5 just to prove that it's working and it's doing this on a brand new sheet. If I step through the routine again, go to sheet 1, copy this data into sheet 5, then look at sheet 5, and then finally change the widths of columns B and C using the range property instead, and we end up with exactly the same result. Which method should you choose? Should you copy and then paste special and then change column widths? Or should you copy directly to a worksheet and then go to that sheet and then change the column widths? It's really entirely up to you. There's very little difference in it. I think if you're not concerned about changing the column widths or providing any more formatting, then certainly this technique, where you specify the extra destination parameter of the copy method, is the more useful one and the more efficient one to go for. But it's nice to know both techniques and both variations of copying and pasting data. If you've enjoyed this training video, you can find many more online training resources at www.wiseowl.co.uk.